Welcome back to this week's edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined by senior editor and owner of Irish Illustrated, Tim Prister, for the second straight week because, Tim, we are going to continue our conversation regarding your now completed 12-game look at Notre Dame's regular season opponents. I should say your first pass through. You have not ranked them yet. That's the more popular of the two season stories. Facts, figures, and futures. Last week, we concentrated on games 1 through 4 because we have a highlight game there for Irish fans. Obviously, the opener against Texas A&M. This week, games 5 through 8, and Louisville is the highlight of that stretch. And Louisville will be on Peacock, not in prime time. And 1 year ago today, you couldn't convince a single Notre Dame fan that would be the highlight game.
No, you could not. It'll be very popular with that game being on Peacock. Again, as long as Notre Dame is affiliated with NBC, we're always going to have that. But still an interesting team. 52 approximately. They may have added or lost a couple here along the way, but 52 players have either left or arrived from Louisville since last year. 31 have joined the program, which is the second most in the country behind Colorado. And Jeff Brom is well situated now at Louisville. They won 10 of their first 11 games, and it seems like losing their last 3 of the year has kind of been forgotten a little bit because of all the hay that they made through the first 11 games.
Well, and we should remind people they were very active in the transfer portal last year. I mean, that was a big part of their jump start for last year's season. 52 is incredible. That's amazing turnover, and you're not even counting it. You said I think it's 4 draft picks and 5.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so 60 different players coming in and leaving. That's the world we live in right now in college football.
Part of the people, of course, leaving Jabari Thrash, one of the wide receivers, Jawar Jordan, who. I didn't go statistically through, but he probably played his best game against Notre Dame last year.
I loved his game. Yeah,
he was a difference maker against Notre Dame's linebackers and safeties. Pretty big infusion of personnel again, as you noted. Tyler Shugg from Texas Tech will take over for Jack Plummer, who we did not think could beat Notre Dame. He did just enough to beat Notre Dame because the defense played so well. But we could focus a little bit on the offense first. Once again, they brought in Power 5 talent and also a little bit from the lower ranks to try to supplement. It worked great for them last season.
Yeah, remember Ja'Cory Brooks, Tim, from Alabama? Of course, he made the big play against Auburn a couple years ago when we were sitting in the stadium in Stanford waiting for the start of the Notre Dame game, and that was a big blow to Notre Dame. But Tyler Shugg, 20 touchdown passes, 11 interceptions, 432 yards rushing, 8 rushing touchdowns. So he can move, he can do some things. That touchdown interception ratio is not great at 20 to 11. But like you said, Jack Plummer, he wasn't, I don't think any of us were really impressed with Jack Plummer's game going into that battle with Notre Dame. And I don't know how impressed we were really coming out of it, but Notre Dame's offensive turnovers that day, that had a lot to do with, or that evening, I should say, that had a lot to do with it. But it's Jeff Brom, and they throw the football. They're capable of doing things offensively, and then defensively, the two big. I think everybody was a little bit surprised that defensive end Ashton Gelati and cornerback Quincy Riley came back. They both seem NFL ready. But I guess people would say the same thing about Howard Cross and Riley Mills too. Maybe Xavier Watts as well. Xavier Watts knew that he needed to come back for another year. But there's some players here, and it's at Notre Dame Stadium. I thought it's interesting that the Vegas made the over/under at 8.5. I think Louisville is certainly capable of exceeding that. I accentuated a couple or 9 teams on their schedule that they could gain victories against. So it'll be a challenge. I think as long as Jeff Brom is there, I don't know when Notre Dame plays Louisville next after this season, but I think they're in for a run of success, largely because of the Cardinal alum, Jeff Brom.
And TJ Quinn back at linebacker, that helps to have someone at every level. You mentioned Gelati because he had a good day against Notre Dame last year. He's a college playmaker that I thought was a deadlock to go pro. He's not undersized really for the modern NFL game where you don't have to be an every down player either. He will make a roster, and we will hear his name as a pass rusher in the future. And that is important because going to the Joe Alt-Blake Fisher matchup, you thought, all right, well, let's see. This will be tough. It's at night. Silent counts. Oh, there's a little bit of pressure on Fisher, but he won the day, and now he has 2 new starting tackles to go against.
Yeah, he does. And I mentioned Quincy Riley. He had a pick against Notre Dame
Yeah.
last year. But Gelati is, he shows so well on film, 6'3", 275. As I am apt to do during the course of the week of game with podcasts, et cetera, Thursday pregame videos and stuff. I mean, I sounded the alert with Ashton Gelati. He's a good football player. Was kind of hoping that he would leave, so he'd be playing against Notre Dame this year. But he's a good football player, and you're right. It's going to be a challenge. He'll match up against both tackles. We know one of those will be Charles Jagasa, and the other one will either be Emil Wagner or Tosh Baker. But that definitely will be a challenge. I loved Jawar Jordan. I thought his game. I thought he was really, really good. And really, Isaac Garendo was very underrated. I'm not sure he did a whole lot against Notre Dame, but over the course of the year, and he was good. He ended up being chosen in the 4th round, and Jordan didn't go to the 6th round. So they lost some talent, no doubt about it, but they brought some in as well.
Notre Dame will have a bye week after game number 5, and I cannot make the joke that they have a bye week after that as well, because the last time a returning 3-9 Stanford team came to Notre Dame, they held Notre Dame to 0.53 yards per rush in the first half and upset the Irish in a game they never should have won, 16-14. Tim, another 3-9 team comes in. They are more arrow pointing up than the moribund dying franchise or program it was under David Shaw at that point. Troy Taylor is a good coach. I mentioned before, I know Ashton Daniels since he was a little kid. But they still struggled a lot last season, and Notre Dame absolutely obliterated them on the ground last year out in Palo Alto.
Yeah, they did, and ultimately Stanford had one of their Stanford's offensive performance against Notre Dame's defense was one of the better ones against Notre Dame's defense. And yeah, it was, it's easy from the outside looking in saying it was time for a change with David Shaw, but he did a great job following.
He did a phenomenal
job. Following Jim Harbaugh, of course. But I agree with you, Tim. I think Troy Taylor's an excellent coach. Troy Taylor helped develop a guy by the name of Cooper Kupp when he was an offensive coordinator at Eastern Washington. Taylor, that is. So, yeah, he's got some things going on. But just defensively, 6 of their 12 opponents scored 42 points or more against them, including Notre Dame. And then everybody loved Benjamin Yurosek, their tight end. I figured he would go pro. Probably made a good move, probably made a lot of money going into this last year in 2024 as a tight end of Georgia.
Yeah, and we should point out that in that Notre Dame game, fumbles kept bouncing 2 years ago. Fumbles kept bouncing Stanford's way. There was not a lot of offense from a pro quarterback at the time that Stanford had in Tanner McKee in that contest, but it was one of those things where you assume this is a year 3 situation, Marcus Freeman, where you say, how does a coach get better in year 3? You can never let letdowns happen like that. It was more of a letdown than the Marshall game in terms of Stanford had nothing to compete against Notre Dame other than Yurosek and McKee at quarterback, but there they were. And I think they realized during that game, we can just take what ND gives us offensively. That should not be the case this year. Stanford's defense should be in a little bit of trouble in game number 6, week number 7 versus Mike Denbrock's offense.
Yeah, I think for the first time in the history of college football, a team they won 16-14 one week, and the next week Stanford won 15-14.
And that was about it, right? One more win that
season. Yeah, that was it for them. But yeah, I expect still going to be a real struggle for Stanford. But offensively is where I think they're going to make improvements again because of Troy Taylor as their head coach. They only averaged 20.6 points per game last year. That was 112th nationally and second to last in the Pac-10. And redshirt freshman receiver Alec Iamaner really emerged last year. He was known nationally when he had a 13 reception, 294-yard 3-touchdown performance against Colorado when they overcame a 29-0 deficit. So he's a threat. There's no doubt about that. Ashton Daniels, I think, will be better than he was last year. Threw for just under 2,300 yards. His touchdown to interception ratio was 11-8, and it wasn't very good. But he has Iamaner and Tiger Bashmeyer, who was banged up against Notre Dame. But I do expect under Troy Taylor to be a significant bump up offensively, but man, they have a long way to go because they average 3.45 yards per carry. and Justin Lamson, the backup quarterback, was actually their leading rusher last year.
That's an amazing statistic, especially when you have an Irvin and a Smith on your team, right? Emmett Smith's son did transfer out.
Yeah, well, neither are quite as good as Dad is.
No, that's for sure. And I thought Daniels was a athlete playing quarterback last year. That might change a little bit this year. But another program, Georgia Tech, with a coach we like on the rise and perhaps a great athlete playing quarterback. Georgia Tech has turned it around here with Brent Key taking over just before mid-season 2022 for Jeff Collins and Haynes King at quarterback. That is a true dual threat situation for Notre Dame when they go down to Atlanta.
It really is. And a lot of people are very impressed with what Brent Key has done. And one of those people was former Notre Dame offensive coordinator Chip Long, who was with Georgia Tech a couple years ago. I remember speaking to him in the offseason, and he was really high on Brent Key. And then Brent Key didn't keep him with the program. So Chip Long's off to Mississippi, Southern Mississippi, I believe it is, right, Tom? But Brent Key's done a really nice job. We're talking about a program that had topped out at 3 victories in each of the 3 previous seasons. He's 11-10 as the head coach. So he's done some good things there. They have a whole bunch of problems on the defensive side of the football. There's no doubt about that. They finished 130th in the country in yards per carry against them at 5.38. But, as you mentioned, Haynes King does some really good things at quarterback, definitely a dual threat, definitely an interception waiting to happen as well. He had the second most interception throws in the country last year at 16, but he is that dual threat. And, you get into the 7th game of the year. This is like all things being equal, Notre Dame, of course, should win this football game and have plenty of offense against the Georgia Tech defense. But this one, and you've pointed this out, if it was played at Bobby Dodd Stadium, it'd be a lot different than it would be in the NFL stadium in Atlanta.
That place was rabid in 2006 for the season opener versus Notre Dame and Brady Quinn. I think Notre Dame was favored by 8.5, and everybody I knew in the world came to stay with me in an Atlanta apartment that week. And everybody I knew in the world bet Notre Dame minus 8.5. And every single one of them was worried about an outright loss as that game went on, because that's one that didn't seem like it should be as close. You mentioned dual threat. I mean, 3,300 yards and 35 touchdowns accounted for it. If he has a day where he has 1 turnover, that is trouble for Notre Dame. It's the type of day where you really have to turn him into a dual threat, but Al Golden can take away one of those, I think.
Yeah, and, keep in mind, Tim, Georgia Tech lost to Louisville 39-34 last year, and they lost to Georgia 31-23.
And that game's at the end of the year. Georgia's playing for a playoff
spot.
Right,
yeah, exactly. So, this is just one of those games. I think it's a sleeper game. Very few people are going to point to Georgia Tech. Interestingly enough, Mike Elko, when he got the head coaching job at Texas A&M, I'm not sure what the dynamics were here, but his defensive coordinator, Tyler Santucci, who you and I remember, I'm not sure Notre Dame fans knew this, but he was a former defensive analyst at Notre Dame. So Santucci went to Georgia Tech as defensive coordinator under Brent Key. So, they've got a lot of work to do. They gave up 42 to Mississippi, 42 to Clemson, 38 at home against Bowling Green and Boston College. So they've got a lot of work to do, but it is one of those kind of games. I am glad that it's in Mercedes-Benz Stadium because it will take some of that rabid fan dynamic away from it. And frankly, in a stadium like that, Notre Dame's going to have a ton of fans when it comes to an NFL stadium.
Kind of ruins my homecoming to Atlanta, though, because I don't know where to stay. That wasn't really a thing, that stadium, when I was living in Atlanta, and I was all set to stay in Midtown. But so, Tim, I want to circle back to last week because we had 4 Notre Dame opponents where we thought these guys are going to play better defense than everybody thinks, including our next one, Navy. This is the time for Notre Dame's offense to look very good. This is the patch of the schedule. When you're going through Louisville, Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy, you expect the Irish offense to be hitting its peak anyway at that time of year, and these could be some high-scoring games, hopefully one-sided games, all but maybe one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Navy has been sneaky good defensively.
Other than
against Notre Dame last year, but you go back to the year before, and now we're getting to be, it's kind of ancient history as you'll see. I mean, they only gave up 89 yards rushing per game and 3.0 yards per carry. Now, their entire defensive line of Jacob Busick, who actually he transferred to UCLA, which is interesting, Donald Bernard and Clay Cromwell. So all of those guys are gone. So it's a little bit of a transition there, but they're capable defensively, and that's a reflection on second-year head coach Brian Newberry. Right. He was there for a handful of years defensively. Notre Dame hammered them at home when we thought that Newberry's defense might give Notre Dame trouble, but he's certainly capable of putting something together. The issue with them is that they're going through a bit of an offensive transformation where it's to put it in the words of the new
this is great
offense coordinator Drew Cronick, the millennial version of the wing T. I think it's more of a just keeping it at the most basic level. I think it's more of a vertical offense as opposed to some of the slot back stuff that they would do wide, but there's still a lot of the same, misdirection and confusion that it causes for defenses. The issue for Navy is they're obviously going to be better running this offense in 2025 and 2026 than they will be in 2024. Now, it is game 8 for Notre Dame. I'm not sure if it's 8 or 9 or 7. I think it's might be game 7 for Navy. So they'll be better at it at that point. But there is a bit of a transition, and they have a running quarterback in Blake Horvath and a throwing quarterback in Braxton Woodson. There's always kind of a red flag when you hear that about Navy having two quarterbacks, one that runs better, one that throws better. It seems like they have difficulty coming up with the kind of combination that really negatively impacts opposing defenses. But they do have two, and we'll see where they are at the quarterback position by the time they play Notre Dame.
It's an interesting dynamic it's probably better for Navy's 11 games, but for Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame coaches, they've always lamented we never get the ball if Navy's offense is running correctly. Well, this is one that's going to rely more on a couple of shots, misdirection to probably try to get cheap scores. It's going to help them in 11 games, but Tim, last year, I think Notre Dame gave up 10 passes of over 30 yards. That's top 5 in the country. I'm trying to think back. They might have given up 3 or 4 of 40 yards or more. That's hard to hit that defense that way. And if Benjamin Morrison, the three corners, Xavier Watts and Rod Herder involved, it'll be hard for Navy. And their one secret sauce against Notre Dame, possession, might not exist anymore.
Yeah, that could very well be. And that's a dynamic that has always played in their favor. One of their great weapons last year is back, and that's their punter, Riley Reithman. 80 punts, 80. Only Iowa punted the football more than he did for Navy. And for the record, Iowa punted 94 times, but they still have that weapon at punter. He averaged almost 45 yards per punt. And a thing that Navy did really, really well last year was they were 4th in the country in turnover margin at plus 11. They forced, again, here it is, getting back to the Navy defense. You don't expect to hear these things about Navy, but they've been pretty stout. Now they're in the AAC. They're not playing the kind of schedule that Notre Dame normally does, but they forced 24 turnovers, recovered 14, which was the second most in the nation behind Cal. I think I speculate a little bit about this. The American Athletic Conference is kind of catching up to Navy a little bit when the opponents get to see them more often. At one point when they joined the AAC, they were 7-1 in the conference, 7-2, 7-1. But in the last few years, they're just 14-17. And I think that's something that, Army's that'll be in our next segment in the final 4 opponents of the year. But I think, when they're in a conference, everybody gets a little bit greater beat on them. And Army is going to be a part of the AAC now as well.
And good Notre Dame teams score on Navy. I think maybe the exception was when Drew Pine's offense, the Tommy Rees Drew Pine offense, was shut down. And they still scored 35 points, but it was totally shut down in the second half 2 years ago. Good question here from Brian Welch, because that's kind of the point of this segment. Which of these games do you think could be a possible roadblock like Louisville was last year? And I think we're trying to focus on these 4 games. Purdue is the not quite trapped, but one you should worry about a little as a Notre Dame fan? Because I said the one-way rivalry situation with Purdue and Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Tim. I think you're still dealing with a rivalry.
Yeah.
In the mind of Purdue, not necessarily Notre Dame players that come from all over the country and don't have any perspective.
Not at
Most
all.
of these guys don't have. Yeah, they don't have any perspective on playing Purdue, and the crowd will be good. It'll be a great opportunity for the Purdue crowd to get into it, and that's one. I say Georgia Tech, but I hesitate to bring up programs like that because they're so poor defensively. So that's where Santucci comes into play. But
Stanford and Navy can't be, Tim. If Stanford is a problem this year, that's a problem. That is a problem to have a week off after a 5-game start. You're either 4-1 or 5-0. If you don't go out and bulldoze Stanford at home, that's a Notre Dame problem, not Stanford doing something.
Yeah, and we had the gathering with Marcus Freeman last Friday, and I think we all came. Pete Sampson said on our Irish Illustrated Insider podcast on Monday that you came away saying, okay, that guy carries himself like a third year coach in Notre Dame. The earlier years, he was like, admitting he didn't know this and didn't know what would happen if they did that. It's a different level of coach and a different level of program now. I think we all feel good about Notre Dame going into this season. It's a veteran team. It's the third year of the L. Golden era on defense, and so you feel even better about that. Now you do have a new offensive coordinator, but it's a clever one in Mike Denbrock, a guy that has been through the wars on many levels, third time through Notre Dame, and so you feel good about, because Marcus Freeman talked about maybe they didn't give Sam Hartman the best chance to succeed last year with the new coordinator. Well, they have a new coordinator now, but this is an experienced one, and that experience should show itself and pay off.
And a good question from Donald Shields. I think I have a quick answer to this. There's like 3 or 4 possibilities, but Donald Shields wonders if you could change anything about the schedule, what would it be? I have an easy one.
Yeah, go ahead. I haven't given that any consideration.
Texas A&M open at Notre Dame this year because Notre Dame has a better team this year than they're going to have next year. And I would like to see Notre Dame sail through Texas A&M in a home opener in South Bend.
Yeah. Again, we would all feel a whole lot better about that game. And
yes,
but again, being in the line of work that we're in, we look forward to these opportunities. I looked forward to Notre Dame going to Georgia a few years back.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great. I think I'd just rather go down there maybe when I'm not thinking Notre Dame could go 12-0 and make the playoff. It's a nice situation to just take your chances in 2025.
Right, no doubt, Tim. And you and I have talked about, just kind of off the record aside, it's like, how do you feel right now about Notre Dame going to take A&M? How are you going to pick the game? I mean, I believe that Notre Dame's better. I also know that Texas A&M has 8 5-star players on its roster now. So, you go into that environment at night, humidity, first game of the offense under Mike Denbrock. It's probably not clicking the way it should, but that's just some of the. I covered the Lou Holtz era very thoroughly, and I look at the game of football a lot like Lou Holtz did, and he taught me that, and that is, you don't worry about, or you don't spend a lot of time thinking about all the good things that can happen. You worry about the pitfalls of an opponent, and Texas A&M on Kyle Field is one of those potential pitfalls.
I think the other change is 4 non-Power 4 programs in one season's a lot. Army and Navy in the same season's a lot. Although every time I say Army and Navy in the same season's a lot, they're always playing Navy. So anytime you add Army, it's in the same season. But 4 Power 4 programs, I think in 1 year is a bit much, unless, of course, you're looking to make the playoff. Because if you go 12-0, nobody cares if you had 4, but you could have 6 Power 4 programs. It wouldn't matter whatsoever. But next year's schedule, I just want to bring it up very quickly before we go. There's not a lot of breaks in next year's. I mean, you have Navy, and then you have Power 4 across the board because Boise State now coming to Notre Dame. Cool story. Boise State gets to come to Notre Dame. They're very excited about that. But your road trap next year's Arkansas. You have A&M and Purdue and USC. You're at Boston College. You're at Miami. You have NC State, Syracuse, and at Pitt. That is just on paper, and in terms of attrition, hitting each other for 12 weeks, and you assume Stanford is going to be the 12th. That's just much harder. It's just a much harder situation as the season progresses.
It really is. And think about the transition that Notre Dame's defense is going to have to go through next year. It'll be the 4th year of the L. Golden. era on defense, but well, the four guys that we thought they could lose some or all of those, Xavier Watson, Jack Kaiser, and Mills and Cross, gave Notre Dame an early Christmas present, all came back, but they will definitely be gone after 2024.
Tim Prister's Facts, Figures, and Futures has concluded. We'll be back next week, I believe. Unless there's breaking news, Tim, come back on Irish Illustrated Spotlight, and we will talk about games 9 through 12, highlighted, of course, by USC. And coming soon, I'm not going to put you on the spot for a date, but your annual First Rate series where Tim rates every position group, schedule, and head and coaching staff. Is that right? Coaching staff.
Right. Within the next, within the next, I got a wedding to attend this weekend, but within the next 4, 5, 6 days or so, we'll start the First Rate 14th annual. I can't believe that it's been 14. It's a lot of work during the summer, but it's a lot of fun because we don't really know. Like, I go into it not knowing the answer, but you asked me last week, you think Notre Dame will end up being number one in my First Rate series? I'm pretty sure they will be. It isn't something that I give a lot of consideration to, but when you look at Notre Dame's schedule and where Notre Dame is veteran wise, and even at quarterback, I don't think I'm going to be listing anybody ahead of Notre Dame's quarterback situation, not only with Riley Leonard, but how good you feel about the backups behind him.
So quickly, before we wrap up, and I know you got to get rolling, I don't think Notre Dame could have been ranked number one any year except for 2021. If you put this in your head, you had Ohio State, Georgia.
Right.
16, you better not have. Like, you had Clemson in 2015. I think maybe 2015, because we didn't know Clemson would be that good. Notre Dame possibly could have been number one, but it's been a long time, I think. We'll have to take a look and see if they were in 2021. He's Tim Prister. I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks again for joining us on another edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight.